The coffee was still hot when my grandmother called me at 7:45 on a Thursday morning in November, and I remember thinking that was strange, because she never called before 9. She said, "Are you coming Sunday?" I said, "Of course I am, Grandma Opal. I've been coming every Thanksgiving my whole life." She was quiet for a second, the way she gets quiet when she's choosing her words. Then she said, "Good. Don't forget I like the cranberry sauce from scratch, not the can." "I know," I said. "I've been making it from scratch since I was 14. "Good girl," she said, and she hung up. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, and I had the feeling you get sometimes when something is being communicated underneath the words. Not the cranberry sauce. Something else. I just didn't know yet what it was. My name is not important right now. What's important is that I am 31 years old. I have a 7-year-old son named Felix, who has my grandmother's cheekbones, and a habit of narrating everything he does out loud, and I have been showing up to every family gathering at my grandmother Opal's house in Charlottesville, Virginia for my entire life. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, the 4th of July if the weather was good. I showed up. I brought things. I stayed to help with the dishes. My older brother Slade had not come to Thanksgiving in 3 years. His wife, Petra, not in the file. I chose it. She is the kind of woman who irons her napkins. Did not like the drive from Richmond, or the house, or the way our grandmother still called Slade by his childhood nickname, in front of people. So they came at Christmas sometimes, when it was convenient. The Sunday before Thanksgiving that year I was at my grandmother's kitchen table, helping her sort through a box of old recipes when she said without looking up, "Your brother called me yesterday." "Oh?" He said he and Petra would be coming on Thursday after all. She unfolded a recipe card in her handwriting from 1974. He said they'd been invited. I set down the index card I was holding. "Who invited them?" She looked up then. Her eyes were gray and very clear, and she had the expression she used when she already knew the answer to a question, but was waiting to see if you'd figure it out yourself. "That's the right question," she said, and she went back to the recipe box. "Before I tell you what my grandmother found in that cedar chest in her bedroom, and I promise you, you are going to want to hear every word of it. Let me know where you're watching from right now. Drop it in the comments. I genuinely love seeing how far this community reaches. My grandmother Opal is 83 years old. She has lived in the same house since 1971. She raised 2 children in it, buried a husband in the cemetery 2 miles down Route 12, and kept the vegetable garden going every spring without fail. She makes biscuits from memory, and she has not once used a measuring cup for anything that matters. She also, for the last 40 years, has kept what the family called the jewelry. Not costume jewelry. Not department store pieces, my great-grandmother's pieces. A pearl strand from 1938, a garnet brooch that had belonged to her own mother before that, an emerald ring from my great-grandfather's family that Grandma Opal wore exactly twice a year, on her wedding anniversary and on Christmas morning, and the thing she called the chain, a gold watch chain from the early 1900s that a jeweler had once told her was worth more than she'd be comfortable knowing, and which she had always said, in that particular quiet way of hers, would go to whoever in the family understood what it meant to take care of something. I had known about the chain since I was 9. She'd shown it to me that summer, let me hold it in my hands, explained that it had belonged to her grandfather, a man who'd worked the railroad and saved for 15 years to buy it. She told me the clasp was unusual, hand-engraved, and that if anyone ever offered me money for it I was to say it was not for sale and mean it. I had never told anyone about that conversation. It felt private, in the way that some things between people feel private. Not secret, but personal. The kind of thing you understand you were trusted with. Thanksgiving morning I drove to Charlottesville with Felix, in the back seat, wearing the sweater he'd picked out himself, holding a paper turkey he'd made at school that he insisted on bringing as a gift. He had written Happy Thanksgiving Grammy Opal in red crayon across the bottom, the letters large and slightly uneven, each one considered. "Do you think she'll cry?" he asked. "Grandma Opal doesn't really cry," I said, "but she'll love it. She cried at my kindergarten graduation." That's different," I said. "That's the kind of thing that gets people." He nodded seriously and looked back out the window, and I thought about the phone call, and the way she'd said your brother called me yesterday, and I turned onto Route 12 feeling the particular weight of something I couldn't name yet, but that sat in my chest, the whole drive. The house looked the same, as it always did. The oak tree in the front yard, the window boxes with the last of the fall mums, the flagstone path my grandfather had laid in 1983. 2 cars in the driveway, my grandmother's old Buick and a silver Audi, that I recognized as my brother Slade's. They were already there. I had not been told they were coming until 4 days ago. Slade and Petra had apparently confirmed with my grandmother 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. No one had mentioned it to me. Felix carried his paper turkey up the path, and I carried the cranberry sauce and the pie I'd made Thursday morning, and I knocked out of habit, even though I had a key. My Aunt Cecily opened the door. That was the first thing that was wrong. Aunt Cecily is my grandmother's sister-in-law. Technically, my grandfather's younger sister, who has lived in Knoxville for 20 years and who I have seen perhaps 6 times in the last decade. She was dressed up, a blazer, real earrings, the kind of outfit you wear when you're performing a version of yourself for an audience. "Oh," she said, "you made it, not welcome. Not come in, you made it," with the particular inflection of a woman who was surprised and not pleasantly so. I always make it, I said. Is my grandmother? She's in the kitchen. We're just getting things set up. I stepped inside. The dining room table was already laid out. The good tablecloth, the china my grandmother used for holidays. Candles in the silver holders. I counted the place settings. 5 plates, 5 sets of silverware. Felix and I made 7. Slade was in the living room with Petra. He stood up when he saw me doing that thing he does where he's friendly in a way that's slightly off-center, like he's not quite sure what version of himself to present. Hey, you made it. 2 people in 5 minutes saying you made it. Neither of them meant it as a welcome. Who set the table? I asked. Aunt Cecily helped, Petra said. She was on the couch with a glass of wine that looked like it had been poured a while ago. Your grandmother said it was a smaller gathering this year. I walked into the kitchen. Grandma Opal was at the stove. She turned when I came in, and her face did the thing it always did when she saw Felix, which was open in a way that it did not open for most people. She held out her arms and he walked straight into them, and she pulled him in and he showed her the paper turkey, and she held it at arm's length and studied every single detail. I did the feathers myself, he said. The real ones are called retrices. I looked it up. Did you? She said. And she meant it. She put the turkey on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a rooster. Then she looked at me over his head and something passed between us. She put her hand briefly on my arm. I'm glad you're here, she said. And it was different from you made it. It was the real version of the sentence. Dinner was set for 1 o'clock. The table had been reset to accommodate 7 place settings by the time we sat down, but the arrangement felt strange in a way I couldn't quite put a name to. Aunt Cecily sat at the end of the table nearest the kitchen, which was where my grandmother usually sat. Grandma Opal sat in the middle, beside Felix, which was not her usual seat. She ate her turkey and watched the table. Slade talked about a project he was consulting on in Richmond. Petra talked about the renovation they were planning. The entryway, the hardwood refinishing, the new fixtures she'd been sourcing for months. Aunt Cecily asked questions about the renovation, in the tone of someone who had heard about it before, and approved of it. Felix told everyone about retrices and then about a book he was reading about deep-sea fish. It was during the renovation conversation that I noticed my grandmother's hands. She was holding her fork but not eating. Her eyes had gone to something over Petra's shoulder. I followed her gaze to the hutch in the corner of the dining room, the one with the glass front that had lived in this house since before I was born. She kept linens in the bottom drawer, and in the glass cabinet above, she had always kept a few special things. A small framed photo of my grandfather, a painted egg from Poland that a friend had brought her in 1988, a blue and white ceramic dish her mother had made. The shelf where the blue dish had sat was empty. I looked at my grandmother. She was looking at it with the expression of someone confirming something they had already suspected. Grandma Opal, I said, and my voice came out careful. Where's the blue dish? The table shifted in the way that tables shift when a question hits something real. Petra set her fork down. Slade reached for his water glass. It broke, Aunt Cecily said, smooth and fast. Couple months ago, tragic, but these things happen. My grandmother looked at her. She looked at her for a long moment. Then she set her own fork down and said quietly, "Excuse me for a moment." She pushed back her chair and walked out of the dining room. We heard her go down the hall toward the bedroom. Aunt Cecily looked at Slade. Slade looked at his plate. Petra refilled her wine. My grandmother came back 3 minutes later. She was carrying a small wooden box, Cedar, the kind with a brass latch that you could find at estate sales, and she set it on the table in front of her place setting. She sat down. In March, she said without raising her voice. I noticed that the dish was gone. I thought I had moved it and forgotten where. I thought perhaps I was being careless. I am 83 years old. She paused. You start to wonder about yourself. She opened the latch on the cedar box. But then in April I noticed that the pearl strand was not where I kept it. And in May, the garnet brooch. She looked around the table. And in August I received a telephone call from a woman at an antique gallery in Georgetown who wanted to confirm my satisfaction with the sale. The table was completely quiet. I had not sold anything to a gallery in Georgetown, my grandmother said. She reached into the cedar box and placed a piece of paper on the table. It was a receipt. A gallery letterhead, a date in July, an itemized list, the pearl strand, the garnet brooch, the blue ceramic dish, an emerald ring that had belonged to my great-grandfather's family. $46,000. She placed a second piece of paper beside the first. This is the authorization form the gallery required. It has my signature on it. She looked at Aunt Cecily. I did not sign this form. Aunt Cecily opened her mouth. Nothing came out immediately. Then, Opal, you were having some memory issues last spring. You may not remember. My signature, my grandmother said, has not changed since 1958. I cross my O differently than most people do. The top of the loop stays open. My sister used to tease me about it. She picked up the authorization form and held it toward the light from the window above the sideboard. This O is closed. Whoever signed this got almost everything right, but not that. Slade's chair scraped back from table. He wasn't looking at Aunt Cecily, he was looking at Petra, and that was when I understood. Petra's face had gone the color of old putty. Her wineglass was in her hand, but she'd stopped holding it properly, the stem resting against her palm, tilted. Petra, my grandmother said. She did not raise her voice. She had never in my memory raised her voice. You came to visit me in March. You helped me repot the plants on the porch. You were in this house for 4 hours while I rested after lunch. Petra set down her wineglass. The gallery woman told me, my grandmother continued, that the pieces were brought in by a woman, late 30s, blonde, who said she was the owner's granddaughter handling the estate affairs of an elderly relative. The room was silent in a particular way that felt like a held breath. Slade had stood up. He had his hands on the back of his chair. Petra, his voice was different than I had ever heard it. Flat. Did you know about the Georgetown Gallery? It was not a question. Petra did not look at him. There were some financial things, she said. Her voice had the brittle quality of something about to break along a pre-existing crack. The business account. There were things I needed to handle. I was going to pay it back. With what? Slade said. She didn't answer. How much debt? He said. She was looking at the table. Petra. His voice was tight enough to cut. 53,000, she said. The dining room held its breath. Aunt Cecily pushed back her chair. She had the look of someone who had walked through the wrong door and was calculating how quickly she could reverse course. I should help with the dishes, she said to no one. Sit down, Cecily, my grandmother said. The same quiet, the same weight. The voice of a woman who had been running a household and making decisions and holding things together since before most people at that table were born. Aunt Cecily sat down. You knew, my grandmother said. Aunt Cecily straightened her blazer. I didn't know the specifics. She called you in June. From this area code. My phone records show the call. Grandma Opal reached into the cedar box a third time and placed a printed phone record on the table. 14 minutes. I sat across from my grandmother and I watched her do this, and I felt something that took me a moment to name. It was not anger yet. I was still in the cold, clear space before anger, where everything is just facts arranging themselves into a shape you were not prepared to see. Cecily had helped set the table with 5 place settings. Slade and Petra had been invited 2 weeks early, in the window before Thanksgiving, presumably so they could be here for this. Presumably, so there would be enough friendly faces around the table that my grandmother might feel contained, might feel outnumbered, might be less likely to ask the direct questions she was now asking directly. They had not counted on me coming, or rather, someone had counted on me not coming. My granddaughter, my grandmother said, was not told this gathering was happening until 4 days ago. She received a text from you. She looked at Slade, saying the plans had changed, that I was scaling back, that she shouldn't bother making the drive. Slade looked at me. I looked back at him. We had grown up in the same house. I had covered for him in high school when he came in past curfew. I had sat in the waiting room when he had his appendix out in 2016. I had watched him get married and held Grandma Opal's hand when she cried at the ceremony. Not sad cried, moved cried, and I had thought we were the kind of siblings who would not do this to each other. I didn't know about the gallery, he said to me. His voice had the sound of a man who was realizing in real time what he had agreed to, what shape the thing he'd agreed to actually was. I thought Petra said she just wanted a quieter gathering, she said. He stopped. She said she wanted fewer questions, I said. He didn't disagree. Felix, beside me, had gone very still. He is 7 years old and he picks up the temperature of rooms the way children do, understanding the weight before he understands the facts. He looked at me. Can I go see the chickens? He asked. Grandma Opal had 3 chickens in the backyard which Felix considered his personal friends and had named after planets. Yes, baby, I said. Put your coat on. He slid out of his chair and went to the back door, and I heard him talking to the chickens before the door was all the way closed, narrating to them in his particular way, telling them about the retrices. When the door clicked shut, the room was quiet again. My grandmother looked at Petra. Then she looked at Slade. You are my grandson, she said. I love you without condition. That is not going to change. She folded her hands on the table. But I need you to understand what was done here, and I need you to understand it completely, because I am not going to explain it more than once. She picked up the receipt from the gallery. These pieces were mine, not mine eventually. Mine. Given to me, earned by me, kept by me for decades. The pearl strand was my mother's. The brooch belonged to a woman who survived things I will not go into at a Thanksgiving table. The ring was my husband's grandmother's. She set the receipt down. They were not yours to take in any form, and they were not yours to authorize, and they were not yours to sell. Petra had started crying, quiet, controlled, the kind that is half real. We were going to lose the apartment, she said. The business had collapsed. I panicked. I'm sorry, Opal. I am so sorry. My grandmother looked at her for a long moment. I understand fear, she said. I understand the feeling that there is no way out. I buried my husband with $1,200 in our checking account and 2 children to feed, and I found a way out. She paused. The way out does not go through someone else's belongings. She turned to Cecily. You will leave today. Not permanently, but for a long while I consider what I want our relationship to be. Cecily stood up with her napkin in her hand and walked out with the stiff posture of a woman trying to look dignified while doing something she knew was not. My grandmother looked at Slade. You may stay or go as you choose. But Petra will leave today, and the 2 of you will need to reckon with what your marriage is built on before you come back to this table. Slade left with Petra. He paused at the door and looked back at my grandmother and then at me. He didn't say anything. He just looked. The look of a man who is calculating what he has allowed to happen and finding the sum larger than he expected. Then the door opened and closed. The sound of the Audi's engine, and then the driveway quiet, and then just the ordinary November sounds. Wind. A crow somewhere in the oak tree. Felix out back, introducing Mars the chicken to the concept of Thanksgiving. I sat down next to my grandmother. For a moment neither of us said anything. The cedar box was still open on the table. The receipt and the forged authorization and the phone records lay in a row like evidence, which they were. How long did you know? I asked. I suspected since April, she said. I confirmed in September when I spoke with the gallery directly. They were very cooperative once they understood the situation. She paused. They had records, of course. She had come in person, twice, the second time to collect the check. Have you spoken to an attorney? 2 weeks ago, she said. 4 is not a small thing. The civil recovery will take time and I may not get everything back. The brooch is already sold to a private collector in Connecticut. She was quiet for a moment. The chain is still in the gallery's inventory. It hadn't sold yet. They've agreed to hold it pending the investigation. I breathed through that. And the estate, she said, and her voice shifted slightly, the careful tone of someone choosing precision. I have been in touch with my attorney about revisions. I want to be honest with you about that, because I do not want you to misunderstand what it means. She looked at me. This is not a reward for today. I have been watching for many years. I have been watching who comes, who asks the real questions, who stays to help with the dishes and actually listens to the answers. She picked up Felix's paper turkey from where she'd set it near her place. You're the one who knew about the O. I didn't say anything. I took her hand. It was the hand of someone who had done 83 years of actual work, dry and warm and sure. I made 2 cups of coffee. We sat on the back steps while Felix showed us his progress with the chickens. He had decided to teach them to walk in a straight line, which was not going well, but he was committed. Later, while I was washing the dishes, I thought about Slade, standing in the doorway looking at me. I thought about how I didn't know yet what our relationship would look like after this. Whether we would rebuild it into something honest, or whether we would do the thing that families sometimes do, which is agree on where the gap is and call that enough. I didn't know. I thought that not knowing was probably the honest place to start. What I knew was what I had always known. The way this kitchen smelled in November, wood smoke and baking, and something underneath that was just the house being itself. The particular weight of the good china when you stacked it. The way the light came through the window over the sink in the afternoon, long and slanted, falling across the floor in a shape that had been there my whole life. I had always known these things. I had always just shown up and learned them, and kept them without thinking about what they were accumulating into. Without thinking that accumulating was something they did. My grandmother came to stand beside me at the sink. She picked up a dish towel. We washed and dried in the rhythm we had found over 20 years of doing it together, and she told me about the new pieces she was researching, specifically a line of art pottery from Ohio, that she said was underrated and misunderstood by most collectors who hadn't done the real reading. You could start over, I said. I already have, she said, and she said it the way you say a thing that is simply true, without drama, without needing it to mean more than it means. 8 months later, the kitchen windows let in the particular light of a Virginia July, and I was standing at my grandmother's counter making iced tea while Felix sat at the table, writing his weekly letter. He had started the letters in December at my grandmother's suggestion, and he had not missed a single week since. He reported on school events, on books he was reading, on the chickens, on things he had learned about that he thought she would want to know. He was very serious about the letters. He said, when I asked him about it, Grammy Opal likes to know things, and she always writes back. She always wrote back. That was true. The forgery case had moved through the system the way these things move, slowly, and then suddenly. There was restitution ordered. Petra had cooperated with the investigation, and that had factored into the outcome. The brooch in Connecticut had not been recovered. The gallery had transferred the chain back to my grandmother's possession in February, and she kept it in the cedar box on her dresser, and once she had taken it out, and let Felix hold it, explaining the clasp, the engraving, the man who had worked the railroad for 15 years to buy it. He had listened with his whole body, the way he does. Slade and I had talked 3 times. Real conversations, not the surface kind. The kind where you say things you can't unsay. And then you sit with the quiet afterward and see what's still standing. I didn't know yet what we were building. But I thought we were building something. I thought the fact that we were still trying was the thing that mattered most right now, and that the rest would take the time it needed to take. My grandmother came out to the back porch where I brought her tea, and we sat in the good chairs and watched the garden and the chickens, and the way the July light moved through the oak tree. The 1906 Roseville Rosaine, she said, looking at her catalog. Do you remember what I told you about the glaze? I thought. Matte, I said. That's the one. The high-gloss version is more common, but the matte is what the early craftsmen were proudest of. You can see the brushwork better. She nodded. She made a small mark in her catalog. Good girl, she said. I sat in the July sun on the porch of the house that was partly mine now, in the way that things become yours, sent when you have paid attention to them, long enough to know them, and I drank my tea and watched the light move, and thought about what my grandmother had said in September, when the attorney called to confirm that the chain was coming home. She had said, some things find their way to the people who were always going to take care of them. She had not been talking about the chain, or she had been talking about the chain, and also about something larger, The way she always was, speaking on two frequencies at once, trusting you to hear whichever one you were ready for. Felix finished his letter. He folded it with great care, licked the envelope, and wrote Grammy Opal in his best handwriting on the front. He brought it out to the porch and placed it in her lap. She picked it up. She held it the way she held things that mattered, with both hands and her full attention. Thank you, she said to him. There's a part about Mars, he said. She figured out how to open the latch on the gate. I thought you should know. I absolutely should know, she said. Thank you for telling me. He nodded, satisfied, and went back inside, already narrating something to himself. My grandmother set the letter on the table between us. She looked out at the garden for a while. Then she said, without looking at me, you never stopped showing up. I looked at the wildflowers she'd planted along the fence, the same ones she'd planted every spring for 40 years. The same ones she would plant next spring and the spring after that, for as long as she was able, and because she had always done it, and because some things are worth the continuing. I know, I said.